Congressman Jamie Raskin is a Democrat of Maryland. He serves as the ranking member on the Oversight Committee, and he joins me now. Congressman Raskin, I guess first your impressions of how things went today.
It was a meltdown for the Republicans, obviously. They advertised to the world that they literally have no facts and no evidence that would justify impeaching President Biden for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And their own expert witnesses attested to that fact as well. And I think that was the part that shocked them, that we were able to get their witnesses to say that there was not remotely a sufficient quantum of evidence that would justify impeaching President Biden. And meantime, we are careening towards a terrible government shutdown that will spread massive pain and hardship and anxiety throughout the entire country. One of the things you might notice if you were watching the hearing, Chris, is that all the Democrats were there for the vast majority of the hearing, and the Republicans began to decamp very quickly, and it was pretty much empty over on their side of the aisle for long periods, for big stretches of it. So, Donald Trump.
Let me ask you. Wait, I want to stop you right there. Why did that happen?
I think they were embarrassed by what was going on. I mean, their witnesses defected from their side, and essentially were saying that there was not sufficient evidence for impeachment. The impeachment inquiry also was never voted on by the House of Representatives, which was something that Kevin McCarthy said he would do, and it was also something that he demanded the Democrats do, which we did do with the impeachment of Donald Trump. And they ended up getting an opinion from the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice saying that there needs to be a vote on the floor in order to give the additional powers to a committee to engage in impeachment, and that delegation needed to be done. But they didn't do that here. Why? Because they are at least 15 or 20 votes down on the Republican side. You have people like Ken Buck, who's a Freedom Caucus member on the Judiciary Committee, a former chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado, who just says the whole thing makes no sense. They just don't have any evidence on Donald Trump. And so Kevin McCarthy obviously was trying to placate Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz and others doing Donald Trump's bidding, who wanted to impeach Biden. So he said, oh, sure, just go ahead and do it. But he was very cavalier with the Constitution of the United States, and it boomeranged on them and blew up in their face.
Yeah, that last point you make, it's always been sort of clear that at a political level, just in terms of internal caucus faction management, McCarthy has viewed these things as related, right? He needs votes to keep the government open. The sop I'll give you is we'll start an impeachment inquiry. But even as soon as he announced that, those same people he was trying to suck up to win their votes on were like, no, not good. They didn't go for it out the door. But now the thing is they got to do it because they've announced it. I mean, it was just so evident to me that they were going forward with it because they said they were. They had hoped they would find some smoking gun evidence or any evidence at all. They don't have it, but they got to do it anyway.
Well, you can't appease Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and ultimately Donald Trump. I mean, that is a rule or ruin faction which literally wants to control the entire government of the United States in their own interests, and they're willing to enthrone minority rule against the will of the vast majority of the American people. They're willing to take away abortion rights from women. They're willing to take WIC funds away, and they're willing to take SNAP funds away from hungry people. They're willing to shut down the government of the United States simply because Donald Trump thinks that will shut down his criminal prosecutions, even though in the last Republican shutdown, criminal cases went forward in the federal judiciary, which is what I'm trying to explain to them. But Donald Trump is convinced if you shut down the government, he'll be able to delay his cases and then maybe get to the election without having to face a jury of his peers. And if he can, just flip 7 million people who voted for Joe Biden over to Donald Trump and get millions of young people who hate everything he stands for to vote for him, then he'll be back in office and he can grant himself and all the insurrectionists a pardon.
I pay attention to this for a living, and I've tried to follow the bouncing ball here on what actually is going to go on with this shutdown. But I'm really confused at this point. I had a thread, I sort of lost it. what's going on? Like, it seems like they're at an impasse. He can't whip the votes to pass it with Republicans. That seems clear, and he's not going to get them. So then what?
So it's utterly dysfunctional within the Republican caucus because he can't tame the rampaging MAGA faction. So there would be a very simple solution if he had simply the courage to exercise it, which is to have the House Republicans put on the floor the clean continuing resolution with the Ukraine aid, with the disaster aid that passed overwhelmingly across the hall in the state Senate with the vast majority, not just of Democrats, but of Republicans, and put it on the floor. So in other words, it would align most of the House Republicans with the Senate Republicans, the Senate Democrats, all of the House Democrats, and the President of the United States. But he won't do it because they're threatening to, quote, vacate the chair, which means to topple Kevin McCarthy. So it means more to him to stay in office than to keep the government of the United States going. But if I were Kevin McCarthy, I would tell him, if he's watching MSNBC right now, go ahead and do the right thing, put it on the floor, let us all vote on it, and if they try to topple your speakership, see who they've got against you, see who they can put up against you. I don't think Matt Gaetz can beat him. I don't think George Santos can beat him. I don't know.
Call the bluff, right? Just to be clear here, there's already a continuing resolution. It keeps the government funded. It has aid for Ukraine and disaster relief. It's passed on a bipartisan basis, huge majorities out of the Senate, right? That language exists. Bring it over from one side of the Capitol to the other. Call the vote on it for a floor. It'll pass with what? 350 votes, probably somewhere in that, out of
overwhelming,
out of 535, maybe even 400, and then you're done. And then if they come for you, they can come for you, but he doesn't want that.
Well, look what they did in the Rules Committee this afternoon while we were in the so-called impeachment hearing. They dismembered the legislation that came over from the Senate, as I understand it. They removed the aid to the people of Ukraine resisting Putin's filthy invasion and the kidnapping and the rape and the military attack on the civilian infrastructure of Ukraine, to make that a separate bill, to try to make it more palatable to the authoritarian MAGA faction. So maybe they would vote for that part of the continuing resolution that does not include solidarity for the people of Ukraine.